Motion be agreed to. Shane Arden.
Mr Speaker, it's a privilege to rise in this debate tonight, but unfortunately for the previous Speaker, the National Party will not be supporting the member's bill. And there's a range of reasons for that, but let's start right at the beginning with a little bit of history. The Fonterra wasn't formed by the Labor Party, despite the comments of the previous Speaker. Fonterra was formed because a group of farmers, if you go back far enough in distance, came to the government of the day saying that they were struggling, as a lot of our colleagues in the other industries in New Zealand do, with collective buying by massive buyers. In fact, most of them at that stage were based in Tooley Street in London. And they used to travel out to New Zealand. I think it was about 1936, Mr O'Connor, slightly before when you were born. May have been before you were born. So they come out to New Zealand. They used to trade one dairy company off against the other and drive the price down. Does this sound familiar? Does anyone know where they could find an industry in New Zealand today where similar type of tactics take place? So that's exactly what was happening. So the government of the day said to the industry, "What would you like?" And the industry said, "We would like to have a much more focused marketing structure." History has a wonderful way of repeating itself. So from that, the Dairy Board was formed. After a long period of trading under the New Zealand Dairy Board, the industry itself again came back to government and said, "This is a very tiresome process. Every time we want to change or make some modification or change market structures or do something different, we're constantly coming back to the government cap in hand for legislative change. And we think that we can go it alone. We don't need the single desk legislation. So we would like a reform of that." And from that, the 2001 Dairy Industry Restructuring Act was born. And that crossed two governments. It was first initiated under the Shipley government, and it was passed by the incoming Clark Labor government with Jim Sutton as the minister. That's the history. Go back and check it, see if I'm right or wrong. That's the history. I remember it well. Served on both select committees in both governments, in both parliaments. So at that point in time, around 10,000 shareholders of what was the combined industry across New Zealand decided that they could form critical mass by merging the two largest dairy companies in New Zealand, which was Kiwi Dairy Company Cooperative and New Zealand Dairy Group, and form a new company taking on board the Dairy Board called Fonterra. It was called Global Co and then Dairy Co, I think, originally. And in the legislation it's known as New Co. And the name Fonterra was born out of that. As the end result of that, Mr Speaker, we have seen unprecedented growth in that industry in the history of New Zealand. And actually, as the previous Speaker said, it has now become 40% of global traded dairy products. It is a success story. And no matter how ideologically driven you are, or what position you come from, or how counterintuitive the model might be to you, or what other argument someone might put up about it, it has been successful. The facts speak for themselves. And it is a New Zealand-owned company, entirely owned by New Zealanders, 10,500 shareholders. And so we do not want to see it broken up or destroyed or eaten away or floated off on the stock exchange or whatever the argument of the moment might be. But then it becomes a question of where the state stops and starts and how much state intervention there should be. And some would argue, from a pure point of view, that the Dairy Industry Restructuring Act itself should go. There should be no legislative control or government involvement or meddling in this. Instead of that, we have a very complex Dairy Industry Restructuring Act, which puts a whole lot of constraints on the behaviour of Fonterra and requirements that they must meet. And, you know, that is where the Parliament has reached a consensus. And as the previous Speaker said, pretty much with cross-party support. That is what's there at the moment. So the question becomes then, what other protections or other such should the state have or put in place, either for the consumer or for the company itself. And the company itself, by 75%, and this is a figure the Parliament doesn't understand. Give me a bit of a hint how many times you get 75% support in this Parliament for a piece of legislation or policy position. 75%. It doesn't happen. It happens from time to time, but not that often. It happens from time to time, I accept, but not that often. So 75% of those 10,500 shareholders voted at their annual general meeting to put a cap of 20% on the tradable amount of their share, which is exactly what the Members' Bill is asking to do. And of course, if you do further analysis on that, Mr. Speaker, what you'll find is that the 20% can never actually be 20%. It's up to 20% because of the trading in and out that takes place in this TAF arrangement. The company itself has to make sure that it never exceeds around 18%, last figures I saw, because otherwise they could momentarily be in breach of their own constitution. So 20% is really a glass ceiling, if you like, that the company must pull up at before it reaches that level. And so it currently sits at between 10 and 15%. And I don't know that anyone could mount a vigorous argument that that is a dangerous position for the company to be in, and a position that could likely end up with the dissolution or breaking up of or floating of or management takeover or etc. of the company. Further protections that the company has within its constitution is that the board must be made up predominantly by farmers. And the last time I looked at it, and I stand to be corrected by the member, they have now voted for a 9-member board with 3 independent directors. So I don't know whether that's actually been implemented yet, but that's the direction they're heading into. So overwhelmingly controlled by the farmers themselves, elected from within their shareholder base. So, you know, are they going to go and do something that the farmers don't want? Well, they have tried. There have been times when the leadership of the company have decided that they are going to go off in a direction that their shareholders don't like. And one thing I can tell you as a shareholding farmer, and I declare that at this point, Mr. Speaker, as a shareholding farmer, when we get unhappy with the board, we sack them. Or we certainly give them a message, change direction, or we will. And that has happened on a number of occasions. So, Mr. Speaker, I understand the concerns that have been raised, but I think it's actually fair to say that right at this point in time, Mr. Speaker, the Fonterra structure is what the Fonterra board have asked for, what the Fonterra shareholders want to see, and I think the success of Fonterra speaks for itself. It does frustrate me, Mr. Speaker, that I have to come back to this House time and time again and justify the success of this company to the Parliament. It seems to me that it's overwhelming. But it does frustrate me that you have to come back. And I guess it comes down to the final point, Mr. Speaker, and that is, do you trust them or not? Do you trust, and I'm not talking about you, Mr. Speaker, I'm talking about the Parliament. I'm sorry to bring you into the debate, but do we trust these 10,500 hard-working, dedicated farming families who have built this industry or not? And it's that simple. And, Mr. Speaker, my money is with the farmers.
Sue Moroney.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. It's a real pleasure to